I'm talking about compassion fatigue. So this is a point where I need to explain it to you so that you see if you relate. Now, did you know that you actually can get hurt by caring too much? Yeah, I know it kind of sounds off or an oxymoron in itself, but that actually is the definition of compassion fatigue. And just to give you a bit more on the same, if you can have those graphics on air, this is an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped for whatever reason, to the degree that it can actually create a secondary traumatic stress for the helper. Now, it goes on to actually say some of the people at risk, and you probably fall in this docket. Look at that. Common among workers who work directly with victims of disasters, trauma, or illness, especially in the healthcare industry. And of course, family members and other informal caregivers of people who are suffering from a chronic illness may also experience compassion fatigue. So now you have an idea of what compassion fatigue is about. Now let's put a face to the same, and to help us do so, we have Christine Mutena, who is a caregiver to 2 children with rare diseases, so they're special needs children. Thank you for joining us. And we have Elizabeth Mutunga, who is was a caregiver to a father who had dementia. He's now passed on, but thank you for joining us. And we have David Wanjala, who is a caregiver to a wife who suffered from a miscarriage. Yes, so of course you also suffered the loss. Thank you for your time. And to help us wade through the conversation, we have Rosa Sanao, who is a counseling psychologist. Thank you for your time. We'll start with you, Rosa. It sounds very removed when you say that you can ever get tired of taking care of somebody you love who is going through a hard time one way or another. It could be mentally, could be physically. But exactly when or how does this set in, compassion fatigue?
Gladys. So just like you said, compassion fatigue is a secondary traumatic stress, and how this occurs is because taking care of anyone involves an emotional investment, that I am there, I am investing my brain work and my emotions into it. So over time, there is that output. I am pouring out my emotion and I have overused my resources. So at a particular point in time, if I am not taking care of myself, I am running empty. And that is where now the fatigue comes in. Just like in physical exhaustion, you lose your physical strength. It's the same thing ideally with compassion fatigue, that you reach a point where you have overused your resources, and now you reach at a place of apathy where you're just removed from that place of offering empathy, and it feels tiresome. You know, you think about it, going for the clinics, doing this, and it just makes you feel like, oh, I can't do this anymore. That's just the overview.
It sounds a lot like, to the layman, burnout. So is that one and the same, or is it different in how it actually, you experience it?
Well, the symptoms are more or less the same, but with compassion fatigue, it sets in at a shorter time. Burnout is more prolonged exposure to trauma, or sometimes just the work overload. But with compassion fatigue, it's coming from a place of the emotional investment in this process of caregiving. Yes.
Okay, so even looking at some of those symptoms, chronic physical, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization is what you're saying. It gets to a point where you literally remove yourself from the same. And if we have those graphics on there, feelings of iniquity toward their therapeutic or caregiver relationship, irritability, feelings of self-contempt, difficulty in sleeping, weight loss, headaches, poor job satisfaction. I mean, the list could go on and on. And this is where I'd like to reel in David. I know today has been such an eye-opener, even as we were waiting to have this discussion. Do you relate to any of these symptoms in your journey?
As you were talking at the reception there, I realized it's like I'm suffering from some of these things. Actually, most of them. The only thing that is different is that I gained weight instead of losing weight. But most of what she's talking about is really what I've been going through without knowing. So maybe I'm a patient without knowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And when you say some of them you resonate with, what exactly?
Like those headaches, they've always been there. Actually, I have not been primarily hypertensive, but my blood pressure always went up. it was always up all through. Like I would go out there and the doctor would ask me, how have you got here? 158 over 132, how?
Wow.
That was bad. There is a time it was so bad that I had to be given medication. I had to sit somewhere with a friend for around 20, 30 minutes so that the pressure comes down. And then he told me, these headaches, you should stop stressing on whatever is eating up your head, you know, things like that.
Okay.
And I didn't know why at my age I'm getting all these things. And then the weight gain I thought is the only reason, but I was told it is not the only reason. There are many other things that cause that. And today I'm realizing it's actually compassion fatigue.
Wow.
Because at that time is what I was going through, whatever I was going through with my wife. Basically talk about the miscarriage she went through and all that. Then financial strain, yes, it's a major issue because I've realized most of the time the public hospitals will not give you a good service. Like when someone miscarriages, most of the doctors think it's somebody's trying to abort or something like that. Some of even the gynecologists who are actually women do not look at them positively. So you would find yourself detached from the public hospitals to go to look for private hospitals for proper care of your wife. And it's financially draining because gynecology is not cheap.
Yes.
Yes,
It's
so
not.
you have to go out there, you know, take some loans, and because you cannot get a medical loan from a bank, you go to friends. Sometimes even that friendship can end because this person would think you're not going to pay them back because you're looking at your earnings vis-a-vis the expenses, and you still have to pay for the rent, you still have to feed your family. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to do. So yes, financial strain is also there. Now that is where pressure comes in.
And especially for a man, because
Yes.
you are the provider.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly.
Okay, and for you, Elizabeth, just listening to him, and in retrospect now, during the time you were taking care of your dad, any of these symptoms resonate?
For me, it was a self-esteem issue. My dad got sick when I was 17 years, and I was just a teenager. And so for me, I would look out and see the other people who are my age are moving on with their life. Here I am, I have become a caregiver. I'm not understanding what I'm dealing with in the first place because there was no information on dementia then, because that was in the 90s. And so it was quite frustrating, just sitting there and trying to understand what am I dealing with. Then you have to take on responsibility of becoming now the breadwinner because he's no longer going to work. And then you have to take your siblings to school and all that. So for me, it was tiring. I was angry. I was frustrated. I had, for me, it was migraines throughout. So I was on medication throughout. So now when I look back, I didn't know what, like what we said, we didn't know what it was called.
Yeah.
But the other day now, because I also now deal more with other caregivers, I realized what I am getting to that point again because of what I also do now. Because I'm also taking care of many caregivers, and most of them, you get very involved with them. You end up even when they lose their loved one, you're there at the funeral, you're speaking at the funeral. So it started showing again. So for one morning, I told my sister, you know, I don't want to do this work anymore. I don't want to help people anymore. I'm tired. So my sister tells me, you have compassion fatigue. And that's when I realized, oh, it has a name.
I know,
It has a name.
That light
Yeah.
bulb came to me the other day
Yes.
too. And just to bring to perspective, Elizabeth Mutunga is actually the founder of Alzheimer's and Dementia Organization of Kenya. That's why she's talking about taking care of other people that wear the shoes that she wore many years ago. And to you, Christine, 2 children, as it is, having one that is, you know, your normal child is a handful. 2 special needs children. What have you gone through that you can say, yeah, I have been here, done that?
For me, I can say my compassion fatigue was like maybe 5 years ago, before I realized I needed to debrief, I needed to take care of myself, and then hence started taking care of others. But 5-10 years ago, I was a mess. I used to ask God, what did I do? I used to think I'm the one who can do this right, so I'm not even asking for help from family and friends. I hit depression. It was like I refused to get any more children, saying I can't deal with this anymore. And till the day it hit me that, you know what, you need to take care of yourself. So I started like taking vacations alone without the kids. making use of my support system, because they've always been there. It's just that I never thought they were there, so that I can actually pack up and leave for, say, a couple of weeks. I don't even need to call home. I only call because I miss them. But I don't have to call home because I know they're well taken care of. They'll be fed, they'll go to school. So I literally go for 2 weeks and debrief and have me time. So by the time I'm coming back, I'm fresh. But before I started doing that, I was a mess.
Passion fatigue. And before we went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rosa, we were asking, at this point, I think it's very important to first recognize it. And it's interesting that everyone here somehow resonates with it. But what are the obvious signs for somebody who probably is dealing with a different need and has never pinpointed exactly what that could be?
I think number one is just to point out that caregiving comes with a sense of loss. Because for whatever, just like everyone else has said, that for whatever situation they were caregiving for, there was a change. There was an abnormal event that happened and there was a change. So there is always a sense of loss. And with loss comes the emotional roller coaster, the stages of grief, because you've lost something. Sometimes you move from denial, you're bargaining, you are depressed, you are angry. And one of the symptoms sometimes for compassion fatigue is you feel angry at people, irritability, difficulty sleeping or oversleeping. If it's someone who's working, your boss may be complaining about your work attitude, you may be getting complaints from your colleagues, there is change in your normal routine. Now you may do something we call emotional blunting, which is responding to situations in a way that you would not normally do.
Okay.
So you begin to realize that small things set you off. How you respond normally, you just throw things off balance. And you could be having difficulty in eating or overeating, overindulgence, loss of interest in the pleasures of life. You begin to experience anxiety, difficulty in remembering simple things, you know. So it's a feeling of hopelessness and powerlessness, especially with terminal illness, because you're feeling out of control. You cannot control this. And the anxiety also comes from a point of, I do not know when this will end. Because caregiving sometimes goes for an indefinite amount of time. You are not sure, will this disease? Yeah, so it is a whole spectrum of just an emotional overpowering, an overpowering place. And it now comes out in physical symptoms like just what I have outlined.
Okay, so for you, David, when you think about it, when during that time that you went through the miscarriage, that it was the most intense for you, where you would have easily switched off, given a chance or a choice?
That morning when I had to take her to the hospital, you know, having known she was pregnant and I was excited and we had even looked for a name for the kid, and now the kid is no more. It was one of the most traumatic moments of my life. In fact, I've experienced death before. My older sister passed on. I had experienced death before, but that aspect of this is my blood, this is my kid, I mean, it affected me in a way that my system to cope became numb. Like, no, there's no pain, there is no argument, there's nothing, I'm just numb. Then in comes my wife, she is bleeding, and I had to sort that issue out. You look at the financial implication and my financial position at that time, it was such a painful moment. And I'm grateful to friends who came in so fast. And my little sister, I'll never forget her. She also helped me out, you know, very fast. Like within 5 minutes of a call, I was able to sort out those issues financially. But the pain of taking her out there, the procedure she was going to go through, my colleagues would not understand. I think right now, after I've talked about it in public, is when they've started to come to terms with what I was going through. But initially, even at my workplace, people would wonder, what is wrong with this guy? It's very difficult to have a conversation with him.
And I guess that's what Rosa is saying, especially for you, because this event kept manifesting itself in different seasons. Because even after the miscarriage, she had to heal and also come to terms with the loss, which was the same thing for you, right?
Definitely. And you see, the easy thing that people do, women have a lot of support groups.
And we talk a lot.
Still a mom is there for them.
Yeah.
They talk a lot. They have their little chamas. They go and talk about these issues. But for men, we actually don't have an exit. We don't have an exit. So it becomes something that is so much bottled up. And you know, with a guy who actually almost doesn't drink like me, it becomes a bit difficult because other men would go into a bar, take a couple of bottles, and they're good to go. They can speak about it. But as for a person like me, I would find it very embarrassing to walk into a pub to talk about my issue. It's very difficult. So my exit strategy has been very difficult. Initially, I used to write a lot, like if I have a loss, if I have some pains, I used to write. But with the miscarriage that my wife went through, I found it such a painful experience to write about. I was not able to write anything, a single word about it. It was just so painful. And today is when I'm realizing I concentrated on taking care of my wife and I forgot
Yes.
myself.
Yeah, that was just a coping mechanism.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, for you, Elizabeth, you say you've been at this, took care of your dad, now taking care of other caregivers with loved ones who have dementia. Can you pinpoint which part of it normally pushes you to the brink?
Right now is when now I have worked with a family, and then now we have already developed this relationship, even with the person living with dementia. And then I have to see them in hospital, and then within a short time they are gone. That for me takes me back to what I went through with my dad. And half the time, there are times even I can't cope anymore. So I go away, I cry. For me, I cry a lot. And for me, it helps me cope. I remember one day there's a gentleman who called me, and for 3 consecutive weeks, every week he called me. I'm like, I was whispering, I can't speak, I'm at a funeral. He just asked me one day, I mean, how many funerals do you attend? What is wrong with you? Do you actually get help? And I'm like, yeah, I get help. But I realize, you know what, you just walk in and you think you're fine. Until now, the day you're like, what she was talking about sleeping, I didn't want anybody to tell me, you know, at least there's a deadline. I'm like, don't talk to me about deadlines. I'm not doing anything. I want to sleep. I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want, it's like you almost go into a depression without knowing, and it is slowly, it creeps in. And before you know it, you don't want to talk to anyone. You're snapping at everybody. Remember one day my children just said, hey, mommy, you're too much. You're shouting too much. And it's because you don't realize. And so that is when I realized, you know what, I have to stop.
Yeah.
So there are things I can do, there are things I cannot do, and accepting the fact.
Okay, now Christine, kids need our attention 24/7. You've recognized when to step back. How do you now cope with the time you have to be part and parcel of them, and you can't step back because it's critical to be there, but you feel saturated?
Well, I have good and bad coping mechanisms.
Okay.
I won't name the bad, but talking to my relatives, actually asking for help, especially like I remember there's a period where there was a lot of clinical errands to be run, both kids, different doctors. Me actually accepting I can't do this alone. So I'm like allocating Sister A, I'm going with you for this clinic. Mom B, I'm going with you for this clinic. So at least I'm not alone. So at the first, I'm not even, because I think for me, my biggest fear is, especially when you're going for a clinic, it can be a routine clinic, but the response you're going to get from the doctor, it can be something small, but it'll trigger a lot. So if I'm not the only one receiving those news, then it makes it a bit better. So I learned to actually ask for help, something as small as take for me the kids to school, because I do the school run. Take for me the kids to school, or pick the kids from school for me. So I'm not the only one who's doing it, but for me to get to that point of saying, yes, I can get help.
Yeah.
Yes, there is help, and ask for it. Because I think, I don't know what Troza has to say about this, but you feel like you're the only one who can do this the best way possible. So you don't want to like
Delegate?
delegate, yes.
Yeah.
You don't want to delegate and get, okay, maybe they'll do substandard, but no, because the love is the same. So I think it's just the letting go that I had to work myself around.
Okay, Rosa, we've had journaling for David. At some point he could, but because of this traumatic experience, he stopped doing it. There's a stepping back and just knowing what you can take, what you can't take, and of course, delegation. Which other ways of coping with compassion fatigue would you recommend?
I can summarize that as self-awareness. it is important to know yourself, where you start and where you end, to know your triggers, what are my limits, and to know what decompresses me, because we all have different things that make us get back into style. So what makes me feel good? And for some people, like he says, journaling, art therapy is very good. Now, art is not just for children. Just go buy the 100 sachet of colors and get a drawing book. And when you're feeling exhausted, just color. Color, and it helps your emotions come out. For some, like dementia patients, music therapy, it helps a lot. Exercise, good diets, you know, for those who thrive on meditation, spiritual activities, ideally knowing yourself, setting good emotional boundaries like she is saying, knowing that the world does move on without me. You do not serve the world breakfast, lunch, and supper. It will still go on. They will be fine. So giving yourself permission to live and come to a place of saying it is not, self-care is not me first, it's me too. That as much as they matter, I matter too. Okay. You know, and coming to that place of self-acceptance and self-love.
I love what you just said, because I think most caregivers, those that I've met and even listening to you guys, there's a point where you battle with feelings of guilt.
Yes.
You know, like, why should I be feeling this when this is a person I love? I should just be the full Mother Teresa and just keep going, yeah? And David, at this point, even now that in retrospect you see some of the issues you've been dealing with, and maybe some came to you earlier, is there something you would share with your wife, which definitely would expose that you're weak too?
Wow. Being men, we've been brought up.
Yes.
You know, you got to bottle up your emotions. You have to be in control. You have to be the man. You have to be strong. Sometimes it's very difficult. But there's a place we went to. We call Couple Fellowship Ministry. We went to sit somewhere. Like, I remember one time we were organized to sit down and talk about each other and our marriage and our relationship and something like that. That first time we talked a lot. It was last weekend. That is when we had it. And we talked a lot about each other and so on and so forth. But I avoided the topic of talking about what I went through. Yeah. So I am thinking of organizing an internal one, she and I, so that we can sit down and talk about it, so that she actually understands what I go through, taking care of some of these issues, my challenges, my fears, because I also have fears of failing her. I do not want to fail. I want her to get the best. There are dreams I had when I was marrying her, things I wanted to do with her and for her, you understand? So when I feel like she understands me, she has my back, then I'm going to get stronger, I'm going to be better. I will not snap at people because I know and I believe she's my best friend, you know, the person I can look up to. So as I'm caring for her, I think it's the high time now we sit down and talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
In retrospect, yeah.
Okay, and it's very encouraging hearing it from a guy. Yeah. And Elizabeth, I mean, you have this organization that people come to you for help to even try and maneuver their own journeys. Yes. Do you feel at times guilty to say, okay, I need to take a step back, we'll see you in a week or two?
I know. In fact, I was just sharing, I think, because we came in earlier with Christine, I was telling her, even somebody asked me, would you please sit in and do a counseling session with another person who needed help? I told them right now, to be honest, I can't do it. I am running a lot with a lot of things. Let me refer you. So now I have learned to say, okay, saying no is fine, and you're being honest. I don't want to do a shoddy job. So it is good to just step back and say, you know what, really right now, see you in about 3 days, I'll be back. And I go away and they're like, don't, and I say, don't call me.
Yeah.
I shall not be reached. Although still you have that thing, you're checking your phone, have they called? But then you remember I said, don't call me. But that you have to make a conscious, yes, that's the word I'm looking for, a conscious decision. Yeah. Because if you don't, nobody will do it for you.
Okay, now Christine, mothers, we are always haunted and haunted by, what is it called? Guilt.
Yes.
We want to be there for our kids at every turn of life. But hey, you are here dealing with two that have special needs, so it takes a toll. Do you ever feel yourself struggling to, okay, I need to do this, but now who will take care of them? What will they think?
Actually, I'm going through that right now because I told I do the school run. Then I also do therapy for the small one. So it's now doing all that, running around, then wondering what time do I have for me to do what I think I need to do.
I think at this point you can tell us, what's the age difference between the two?
12 and 8,
Okay.
so there's like 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm old.
But
Anyway, so for me, what's stressing me right now is if I wasn't there, who would do it for me? And I've been struggling like that for the whole year, because even talking to my sister earlier on, I'm like, what if I can't travel at the moment, because who's going to take care of them? Who's going to do that? But then I had to come for the show. And then I called their dad, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'm not going to be available in the mornings. Like, it's okay, I'll sort it out. So I didn't have to worry who's going to do it. I just needed to know it's going to be done. So that has kind of like,
giving you some
you know,
moment,
so
yeah.
I think it's like you have to try and get out of the comfort zone and stop thinking that I'm the one who can do the best, I'm the one who can do this, and just ask. Because worst case scenario, you'll find out, yes, you're the one who can do it. But if you don't ask, or if you don't try out your options, then you'll always be in that rat race with your own mind.
Very true.
Yeah.
And even as we finish this conversation, I think it's imperative we talk about how to prevent, because they say prevention is better than cure. Fine, there's some things that you might inevitably have to deal with, but for you to stop yourself from getting to the point where you actually are at your worst, what can you prevent? How can you prevent compassion fatigue?
Again, self-awareness, knowing your triggers, use a support system. As she was speaking about wondering what, if I am gone, what happens, teach the people around you how to do what you do. You will be surprised that people are quick learners. So use the support system around you, delegate, and then set me time, times that you can just go to decompress, like a regular routine of self-care. Knowing emotional boundaries and setting healthy boundaries with yourself, that I can say no, because sometimes saying yes is feeling a need of approval, because people will see that I am always the good one, and they will see that I take care of my person very well.
Yes.
So coming to a place of also personal healing and just saying, these are my boundaries, I will say no, and having a regular self-awareness routine and self-care routine. And support groups, like what they are doing, having regular support groups with people who get you and people who understand what you're going through. Ideally, that's the spectrum of it.
And the role of therapy?
The role of therapy is self-awareness, because self-awareness is the beginning of healing. You will be able to know your root causes, how to manage, how to cope, and even just working within your support system.
And getting professional help, because most people ignore the need for that.
And actually just what we are doing right now, when you were mentioning healthcare providers at Still a Mom, we are doing something called respectful bereavement care, where we are training healthcare and caregivers on how to take care of themselves and how to recognize compassion fatigue, and even just how to offer quality of care to other people, so that they are not throwing the irritations out because of the being worn out. So it's a very interesting conversation. We are encouraging even HRs and workplaces to be on the lookout for this compassion fatigue and kind of prevent it by doing workshops and training their workers to recognize their triggers and do self-care routines. Yes.
Okay, very important. Now, this is a conversation that could have gone on and on and on, because there's so many aspects of it. But I think it's important to be aware that there is compassion fatigue. You could be doing it for all the right reasons, but if you are not taking care of yourself, it is bound to come back and bite you, literally. Yeah. So we've been talking to Rosa Sanao, counseling psychologist. David, thank you so much for being so candid with us. And Elizabeth, Christine, thank you for making time. And of course, if you have any questions, if you need any help, reach out to us at Gladys_Gashanja at NTV Kenya. Any of these panelists will be willing to walk with you. Well, that has been NTV Today. NTV Sasa starts right after this. My name is Gladys Gashanja. See you at 1 p.m.